Ladies and gentlemen, it's that time of year. The time where we look back upon the year that was, and reflect upon what was said, done and created. I of course want to get in on the action and do some looking back as well. So welcome to my first ever top 10 video. Today we'll be counting down my top 10 games of 2014. First, a few notes before we get to the actual countdown. There were several high-profile games that I didn't get around to playing this year. As such, they will not be making an appearance on the list. These include Shadow of Mordor, Destiny, Advanced Warfare, anything on the Wii U, Broken Age, Sunset Overdrive, Infamous, and finally Wolfenstein: The New Order. If I get around to them, I may release a revised list or something, we'll see. And like with all lists of this kind, these are the games that I enjoy the most based on my personal preferences. They may or may not overlap with your personal favorite, but that's the beauty of gaming. There is something for everyone, regardless of their taste. Now, with that out of the way, these are my top 10 games for 2014. Number 10. Civilization: Beyond Earth. I'll be the first one to say that this game is not as good as Civilization 5, especially after the 2 expansions. That said though, it's still a magnificent strategy game. The new setting, plus some new gameplay elements, really opens up the game to some interesting new scenarios and tactics. And like with any Civilization game, the feeling of just one more turn is there right from the get-go. Something I really like about the game is a really clean style and aesthetic. It perfectly matches what I would have thought a Civilization game set in the future would look like. Something I also very much enjoy is the new affinity system and how it changes both the way you play as well as the aesthetic appearance of your troops. I also have to say that aliens are a hell of a lot more fun to deal with than the regular barbarians. And again, it's just really fun to play, especially if you just want to kick back and you have a few hours to burn. As stated earlier though, it is not as good as a fully upgraded Civ 5. That said though, even a slightly inferior Civilization game is still good enough to make it onto my list. If anything, I'm really excited to see where they go from here and what future expansions might bring. The reason it doesn't make it higher on the list is because there are many features from previous Civilization games missing. Still, it is more Civilization, and in my book, that's pretty much always a good thing. Number 9. Telltale's Game of Thrones. Keep in mind that when I'm talking about this game, I'm specifically talking about the first episode, Iron from Ice. If there is one gaming formula that just clicks with me, it's Telltale's. There's just the right amount of dialogue and player choice to make it appealing to me. But what draws me to it the most is that it focuses on the characters, something that I come to appreciate more and more over the years. Given the stellar job the studio did on, for example, The Walking Dead and The Wolf Among Us, me and a friend were talking, saying they would be the perfect developers for a Game of Thrones game. And wouldn't you know it, like 2 weeks later they announced this. The Game of Thrones universe really is the perfect setting for this kind of game. A world packed to the brim with interesting lore, filled with amazing characters, and a narrative that is already largely driven by intrigue and deception. And Telltale really make the most of it. I very much like the concept of playing 3 different characters. It really allows them to show off the world from many different angles, as well as putting the characters in interesting and unique situations. I particularly like the interactions with already established characters. For example, coming face to face with Queen Cersei when you know what that woman is capable of is genuinely terrifying. It also doesn't hurt that the actors from the show will lend their voices to their characters in the game. The game is also peppered with interesting and difficult choices. I think we all have a pretty good idea what character we think we would be if we were in this world. However, if this game has shown me anything, is that living as a moral person in Westeros, that's kinda tricky. I think this game is at its very best when it shows that it too plays by the narrative rules laid down by the book and the television series. That ever-present and very eerie feeling that indeed no character is safe. It really adds weight to every choice and makes some of the more dramatic scenes gut-wrenchingly tense. It really is a great game, and I would recommend it to anyone with even a passing interest in the source material. Number 8. Tales from the Borderlands. Like with Game of Thrones, when I'm talking about this game, I'm talking about the first episode, which is the only one that has been released so far at the time of writing. Well, would you look at that, another Telltale game. Out of all the games that Telltale have announced after the success of the first season of The Walking Dead, this was by far the one I was the most skeptical towards. This is a universe that has been built up around one central theme, shooting people in the face. How in the hell are you going to make a compelling adventure game out of that? Well, like this, it turns out. The setting is surprisingly suited to Telltale's formula. I really think that this is a much better vehicle for portraying what it's like on Pandora. You keep hearing about how dangerous this world is, but when you're playing a Vault Hunter, you don't feel any of that. You never experience any kind of tense situation. The worst thing that can happen is that you get knocked down while shooting, and then it's just to run back from the respawn point. In other words, nothing really poses a threat. And that's why I think this game is so brilliant. Here you play characters who, while not helpless, can't shoot their way out of any problem. As such, all the bandits and psychos you run into seem to be genuinely dangerous. With that in mind, I can't help but feel that the original Borderlands games have been going about it the wrong way. This is how you show off what a great setting Pandora actually is. The game is packed with amazing and memorable characters who are all brought to life brilliantly by an excellent voiceover performance. The story itself is really exciting and well written, and it shows off some interesting sides of Pandora that we haven't really seen before. I also have to say, this game is genuinely funny. I played this through with a friend, and more than once we missed the line of dialogue because we were too busy laughing at the previous one. Also, Loaderbot, best new character of the year, no contest. I also love how the game contains previously established characters as well as Vault Hunters without taking away the focus from the new ones. If anything, it's great to see Vault Hunters in action from another character's perspective. To summarize, this game was by far the most pleasant surprise I've had all year, even supplanting Game of Thrones as my favorite new Telltale game. So why is it not higher on the list? Well, it's as I said earlier, both this and Game of Thrones only have one episode out at the moment. As such, they are really short and can't really compete with a full-length game. So I can't in good conscience give them any higher spots than this. That said though, they're both amazing and I'm so looking forward to the coming episodes. Keep this up and they'll find themselves a hell of a lot higher on next year's list. Number 7. Defense Grid 2. Since playing custom maps in Warcraft 3, I have always been extremely fond of tower defense games, and the original Defense Grid is easily my all-time favorite standalone TD game. I have more than 100 hours logged into that game. It really hit the sweet spot for me in what I'm looking for in a tower defense. Just the right balance between tower strength and macing opportunities, with no need for any unnecessary gimmicks. Aside from your towers, the only thing you had was an orbital laser, which basically wiped out anything it hit. The thing was that it took so long to recharge that it became more of a panic button, rather than some cheap crutch you could easily rely on. This, for me, was basically the ideal TD game. That is, it was my favorite until the sequel came along. It improves on its predecessor in all the right ways, and shows that it's still the best tower defense game around. And while I really like the new towers and activatable abilities, what really struck me is the improvement in map design. They're far more varied and it really forces you to adapt your strategy. Some maps really push you to the limit and you have to demonstrate that you fully understand what each tower does. It's as addicting as ever and it really is loaded with content. The story, which was a surprisingly strong point in the first one, continues here, and I dare say that this one is probably even better. I really had tons and tons of fun with it, and if you have even a remote interest in tower defense games, then you owe it to yourself to check this one out. I guarantee you will not be disappointed. Number 6. Dark Souls 2. Alongside Mass Effect, the Souls series is my favorite new IP to come out of this console generation. Aside from its infamous difficulty, what's always drawn me to these games is the atmosphere. The feeling of being completely alone up against a world that wants nothing more than for you to perish. There is just something special about that. Now, I will happily admit that I think that Dark Souls 2 is the weakest in the series so far. But even with that said, it still leaps and bounds above many other games. And let's give praise where praise is due, there really are some elements that have been improved in the sequel. For example, I really like the new hollowing mechanic a lot more. It encourages you to try to stay human, something that I quite missed in both Dark Souls and Demon Souls. I also found co-op to be more intuitive and easier to use, which is something I appreciate a lot. I wasn't that big of a fan of the new bosses in this game, but to take them down with 1 or 2 other players, it's just an amazing feeling. And the atmosphere, while not quite on the same level as the other 2 games, is still top-notch. This is particularly true in the DLC, which, honestly, I think is the best part of the game. If anything, they showed how good this game is when you're allowed to sink a lot of time into one particular area. And while no boss in this game was as challenging as, say, Ornstein and Smoke, the satisfaction you get when you take down a boss that you've been working on for hours is still unrivaled. I really don't think that any other game lately has even been able to come close to that. As mentioned earlier though, I do not think that this game is as good as its predecessor, and I will probably be making a video on why I think that is sometime later. Regardless, I sank dozens of hours into Dark Souls 2, and I would be lying if I said that I didn't enjoy the vast majority of them. Similar to my reasoning with Civilization Beyond Earth, even if you're the weakest in an absolutely stellar series, you're still in pretty good company. There are still some story bits that I would like to see further explored, and hopefully they will get to that with that new expansion thingy. Again, this game is still playing second fiddle to the rest of the series, but I would still say it's well worth your time. And now, we patiently wait for Bloodborne. Number 5.
Our bond is iron. Our will unbreakable. Who will stand against us?
World of Warcraft, Warlords of Draenor. Let me give you some backstory to this. I started playing World of Warcraft in the closed European beta, that was in late 2004. After that I more or less played the game non-stop, with varying degrees of activity, up until 2011. That's where my enthusiasm for the game started to die off, and when they announced the Mists of Pandaria expansion, I was wholeheartedly disinterested. At this point I had also cancelled my subscription. And then they announced Warlords. I kept my eye on it, and as we got closer to release, I got more and more interested. I felt that if this doesn't bring me back to WoW, even in a casual capacity, then I don't think anything ever will. I played it for like maybe half an hour, and just like that, I was super enthusiastic about Warcraft again. The new world is absolutely gorgeous, and it's set up in a phenomenal fashion. The new characters they introduced fit right in, and they even overshadow some of the established ones. I think what really drives this expansion forward is that it's set in a world that is, well, how should we say, not fragile. Previously, Blizzard had to treat the world in such a way that it would be ripe for new expansions and games, even as the current one came to a close. But this world is an alternate reality, meaning that they don't have to, quote-unquote, look after it. They can bend it, break it, and twist it in all kinds of ways. They don't have to concern themselves about how events leave the world, and they don't have to be concerned about characters dying. As such, this is probably the most explosive and dynamic story they've ever put into the game. Gameplay-wise, the game is better than ever. The questing is on some next-level stuff compared to previous expansions. The dungeons are intriguing, and managing your garrison is super addictive and so much fun. This is without a doubt the best World of Warcraft expansion that has ever been created. And if you ask me, this is the best expansion Blizzard has made since Warcraft 3: The Frozen Throne. It brought me back to a genre I thought I'd burned myself out on completely years ago. And for that, it deserves credit. Number 4. South Park and the Stick of Truth. I saw South Park for the first time when I was 9 years old. I had pretty much no idea what was going on, as I really didn't speak a word of English, but for some reason I was inexplicably drawn to it. And since then I've considered myself a fan, even if I haven't really been keeping up properly with the later seasons. And along comes this game, proving itself to be the South Park game I didn't know that I really wanted. The kids doing a fantasy LARP is the perfect backdrop for an RPG. And this being South Park, you start to speculate how this is gonna go off the rails, and let's just say it doesn't disappoint. The style of this game is damn near flawless, and it would almost be more accurate to call it an interactive episode rather than a game. You well and truly feel like you are part of the South Park universe. And like with Game of Thrones, the game is at its absolute best when you come into contact with already established characters. And if you're a South Park fan, you're in luck, because pretty much every character shows up at one point or another. So there's a pretty high chance that you're gonna run into whoever is your favorite. Another thing this game is absolutely filled with is memorable moments. I dare say that there's some stuff in here that has never ever been put in a video game before, and probably never will be again. Such as getting shrunk down, fighting underpants gnomes on the bed where your parents are having sex, and a quick time event involving you dodging your father's swinging ballsack. If that sounds a bit weird, then buckle up, because there's plenty more where that came from. In case you hadn't already guessed, this game is absolutely hilarious. Granted, if you're not a South Park fan, then you're probably not gonna become one by playing this game, but if you are a fan, then you're gonna have a blast with this. In addition to a great presentation, the gameplay is also really solid. If I were to level one criticism at it, it would be that the combat system might be a bit too easy, but honestly, I don't mind. Just seeing the various enemies and their attacks is entertaining enough. All in all, this is a damn near perfect fusion of a video game and a television series. And those of us who are fans of both couldn't be happier. Number 3. The Wolf Among Us. Telltale does it again with a third entry on this list. Yet another testament to how much I love the kind of games they're making. I played this through with a friend, and it was probably the most interesting quote-unquote co-op experience I've had all year. We spent so much time speculating and discussing in between episodes, trying to figure out what was gonna happen next and who was the real murderer and whatnot. We also spent a lot of time discussing the various moral choices in the game, which was also a lot of fun. This is another one of those games that just clicks for me. The characters are nothing short of amazing, especially in relation to their fairy tale origins. They are also wonderfully designed, especially when some of them turn into their true form, some of which are downright terrifying. Overall, they nail the comic book art style, which really helps you get fully immersed into this universe. Speaking of which, as someone who hasn't read the comics, I have to say that both the setting and the premise are surprisingly accessible. What also really helps bring it to life is, as with any Telltale game, a fantastic performance by the voiceover cast. There are those who say that the story loses steam the further into the episodes you go, but I would actually disagree with that. I was engrossed all the way through, and I have to say I think that every episode brings something unique and interesting to the table. These include some fantastic action sequences. Given that most characters in this universe are really hard to kill, the fight sequences get really nasty really quickly. Needless to say, I cringed more than once. I also have to say that the last action sequence in the final episode is nothing short of a masterpiece. It was one of the few moments this year that had my jaw dropping in amazement. I'm also a big fan of the game's ending and how much speculation it opens itself up to. There is a fairly high possibility that I will be making a video about the ending alone. Some people didn't like it as they felt it was a bit of a bait and switch, but I loved it. So to summarize, I adore this game and everything it accomplished. If you're a fan of art, you may want to think twice about picking it up as it really doesn't pull any punches in any regard. Even so, this game really is a testament to what Telltale can do when they're on the ball. Number 2. Dragon Age Inquisition. The original Dragon Age is one of my favorite RPGs of all time. I loved the setting, I loved the characters, and I loved the agency it gave you. It was just a damn fine game overall. Then came Dragon Age 2. I'm one of those weird people who didn't outright hate Dragon Age 2. In fact, I would probably say that I kinda like it. That said, I am not blind to its flaws, far from it. With that in mind, I was kind of nervous for the release of Inquisition. They really had to make a return to form, otherwise I would have considered this franchise more or less squandered. Thankfully, BioWare showed us that they are still fully capable of making great Dragon Age games. I think what really helps this game is the setting and how it's more interesting than ever. Pretty much everything is in a state of flux and all the conflicts feel like they could go either way. In other words, a perfect setup for the game. It's also really interesting to finally be able to see some of the organizations, such as the Grave Wardens, from an outsider's perspective. I also think it was the proper choice to put the player in a position of power. That way your decisions become even more influential, helping you further shape the world. And it wouldn't be a BioWare game without companions. I flat out loved the characters and origins, though I have to say that there was really none from 2 that stuck with me. This time it's a bit of a mixed bag. There are some characters I don't care much for, like Solus or Sarah. But for every character I don't like, there are like 2 to make up for them. I have to say I'm particularly fond of Dorian and Iron Ball. The interactions with pretty much all characters are good, and the party banter is more entertaining than ever. Another thing I really like is that we finally get to see some more of this world. No longer do we have to picture or lay based on Liliana's description, now we actually get to go there. In my opinion, some of the open world areas may be a bit too big, but that's a minor problem at best. The combat is entertaining, the story is interesting, and the voice acting is downright superb. There really are very few criticisms that I can level against this game. Like with Telltale games, the BioWare formula is one that just clicks with me on almost every level. Whenever I get my hands on one of their games, I just sit down and savor it and try to fully appreciate how wonderfully crafted it is. And Dragon Age Inquisition really is no exception. It's a magnificent comeback for the series and a great return to form for BioWare. Before we get to number 1, a few honorable mentions to games I played and enjoyed this year, but that didn't quite make it onto the list. Hearthstone. I enjoy Hearthstone as much as the next guy, but I wasn't quite as enthralled as many others seem to have been. Still a really solid card game though, just oozing with that Blizzard polish. BioShock Burial at Sea. Yeah, I know the first episode came out in 2013, but it wrapped up last year, so I'm gonna count it. A nice merging of Infinite and the original, as well as a good ending to the Infinite storyline. Not quite mind-blowing enough to land it on the list though. Far Cry 4. I'm currently playing this game through with a friend on our weekly get-togethers, and I've promised not to play it when he's not around, so I haven't gotten that far into it. From what I played though, it's basically Far Cry 3 in the mountains, which, while not bad, isn't the most innovative. I will say this though, storming an outpost on the back of an elephant is probably the most fun I've had in a game in ages. Valiant Hearts. This game has one of the best endings of the year, and in my mind that's what's saving it from mediocrity. I'll be honest, I did not have that much fun playing the game as I ran into multiple bugs and crashes. Having seen the conclusion though, it brought me back around and left me with an overall positive feeling. However, it still took one too many missteps, both in execution and direction, to make it onto the list. And finally, The Last of Us Left Behind. It basically goes without saying that I absolutely adore this expansion. However, it was a little too short to merit a spot on the list. It does, however, contain my moment of the year, and if you played it, you know what I'm talking about. I've been considering making a countdown of the most memorable moments from this last console generation, and if I get to it, this DLC will certainly be making an appearance. Number 1. Transistor. You know, when I was playing this game, I kept thinking, yeah, this is really good, but it's not really Game of the Year material. But the more I kept thinking about it, the more it grew on me. I came to realize how expertly crafted every single element of the game was, and before I knew it, I was comparing it to all the other games I was playing. And just like that, it was at the forefront, the game that all other games this year had to surpass. Dragon Age made a valiant attempt, but at the end of the day, there was no other game that had affected me like this one. There are just so many ways to praise it. The setting is super interesting and a great variation on a tired stereotype. Its very nature lends itself to wild speculation and great discussions. It's extraordinarily well written, with not a single word wasted. The voiceover performance, especially by Logan Cunningham as a transistor, is just perfect. The combat system is unique, deep, tactical, and so much fun. Every player have their own unique ability setup and customization, but yet somehow it remains very intuitive and easy to use. The art style is unique, colorful, and polished to an absolute shine. Every single venue is in itself a masterpiece, and you want to push on just to see what's around the next corner. And the soundtrack. Oh sweet baby Thor, the soundtrack. These compositions are good enough to rival even the most legendary gaming soundtracks. I'll put it this way, when I reviewed my Spotify statistics at the end of last year, In Circles, the song you're currently hearing in the background, was my third most played song all year. That will give you an idea of how much I love this soundtrack. Even the ending of the game is just fantastic. It nails an atmosphere that I've yet to come across in any other game this year. I could keep going all damn day about how much I love this game. But when it all comes down to it, this was the game that moved and affected me more than any other in 2014. Which is why I'm naming it my Game of the Year. Supergiant's record remains unblemished, and I'm so looking forward to see what they come up with next. So there you have it, my top 10 games of 2014. I hope you've enjoyed my first countdown video, and if you have any feedback on the format or whatnot, let me know and I'll take it into account whenever I make the next one. Also, I'm super curious, which was your favorite game of 2014? I don't think I've ever seen a year where so many different games get awarded the Game of the Year title from different outlets, so I am very interested in hearing which one you like the best. Anyhow, that's gonna do it for this video. If you're curious about what I'm doing and how the next video is coming along, then you can always follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Links are in the description. And once again, Happy New Year! I hope you have an absolutely spectacular 2015. I for one am very much looking forward to it. So until next time, take care folks.